While shoveling snow from our driveway at 5 a.m. before work, I noticed my neighbor secretly installing a hidden camera pointed at our house. When I knocked on his door, he said, "It's just for safety." I smiled and replied, "Funny, that's what my lawyer said too." By noon, the entire street was talking, and what the police found buried under his porch made everyone gasp. Buffalo winters have a way of making you feel like you're the last person alive on Earth. The cold doesn't just creep into your bones. It settles there, making a home in your joints, turning your breath into thick clouds. I was already used to it, though. I had to be. Every morning, without fail, I was up by 5, shoveling the snow from my driveway before heading to work. It wasn't even fully light out yet, just that eerie gray-blue haze of early dawn, the kind that makes everything look frozen in time. I was halfway through clearing the driveway when I noticed movement across the street. My neighbor, Kessler, was crouched near his garage, fumbling with something small, his breath coming out in short, nervous puffs. I paused, resting my hands on my shovel, and watched. He was attaching a small black device to the siding of his house, adjusting it carefully. I squinted. A camera. Now, Harold wasn't exactly the friendly type. In the 3 years I'd lived here, I could count the number of conversations we'd had on one hand. He kept to himself, never attended the block parties, never waved when passing by. But this was strange. And what was stranger, he wasn't pointing the camera at his driveway, or his front door, or even the street. It was aimed directly at my house. I let out a slow breath, my fingers tightening around the shovel handle. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe he had some weird, paranoid reason for installing it. But I wasn't the kind of guy to just let things slide. I dropped the shovel, wiped the sweat off my forehead, and trudged across the street. My boots crunched loudly in the fresh snow as I made my way up to his porch. I knocked, firm, but not aggressive. Just enough to let him know I wasn't messing around. A few seconds later, the door creaked open an inch, and Harold's pale face appeared. He was in his usual getup, an old gray sweater, thick socks, and that expression of his, somewhere between annoyed and exhausted. "Morning, Harold," I said, flashing him a tight-lipped smile. "Didn't mean to bother you so early, but I couldn't help but notice." I motioned toward the camera. "What's that about?" His face didn't change, but I caught the slight flicker in his eyes. "It's just for safety," he muttered. "Safety," I repeated, nodding slowly. "Right. Just seems odd, since it's pointing at my house instead of anywhere else." He shifted slightly behind the door, like he didn't want to be seen too much. "It's not just your house," he said quickly. "It's the whole street. I've had a suspicious activity around here lately." I raised an eyebrow. "Suspicious?" He swallowed. "Yeah, just, people lurking around at night." I didn't buy it. "So you're not recording my house specifically?" I pressed. Harold sighed, his fingers tightening on the doorframe. "Look, I don't have to explain myself, all right? It's my property. My camera." I exhaled through my nose, nodding slowly. "Sure, Harold. Just making sure there's nothing I should be concerned about." He said nothing, just gave me a stiff nod and shut the door. That was it. But something about the whole thing didn't sit right. By the time I got back to my driveway, the wind had picked up, whipping against my face. The whole interaction left a bad taste in my mouth. And apparently, I wasn't the only one who found it strange. By noon, the entire street was talking. It started small, just murmurs between neighbors outside while they shoveled their own driveways, little comments at the grocery store checkout. But by afternoon, it was full-blown gossip. "Did you hear about Harold?" Mrs. Patterson from 2 doors down whispered to my wife, Julia, as they stood near our mailbox. "He's been acting strange for months. I saw him digging in his backyard last week," another neighbor added, lowering his voice. "Thought it was weird at the time, but now." And then, just after lunch, 2 police cars pulled into Harold's driveway. Julia and I were on the couch when we saw the red and blue lights flashing through our curtains. I sat up immediately. "No way." She followed me to the window, peeking through the blinds. 2 officers were standing at Harold's door, talking to him. He looked irritated but eventually let them inside. 15 minutes passed. Then 30. Then an hour. And then, more police arrived. 2 more patrol cars. A forensic van. The whispers outside turned into full-blown speculation. People were stepping out onto their porches, watching as officers moved in and out of the house. "What the HLL is going on?" I muttered. Then I saw it. An officer emerging from Harold's garage carrying a shovel. My stomach dropped. They were digging in his backyard. They found something fast. Within minutes, more officers were called in. Then crime scene tape. Then hushed radio chatter. People gathered on the sidewalk, murmuring, shuffling from foot to foot. Julia grabbed my arm. "You don't think?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. And then, they brought something out. A body, wrapped tightly in plastic, covered in dirt. The officers moved quickly, shielding it from view, but we all saw. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone muttered, "Jesus Christ." The police didn't say much, but within the hour, Harold was in handcuffs, his face pale and blank. As they led him toward the squad car, his eyes locked onto mine for just a second. And for the first time since I'd known him, I saw something behind that empty stare. Fear. News broke fast. The body belonged to a woman, Claire Novak, missing for 2 years. Harold's ex-wife. Everyone thought she had just left town after the divorce. Moved on. She hadn't. She had been under his porch the entire time. That damn camera. It wasn't to watch me. It wasn't about safety. Harold had put it up because he was scared. Scared someone would dig too deep. Scared that his secret would come crawling out of the ground. And he was right to be scared. Because I found it. And now, he's never coming back. I stood there on my porch long after Harold was driven away, my breath curling in the icy air. The flashing lights of the police cars flickered against the snow, casting strange, eerie shadows. Neighbors lingered too, some murmuring in hushed voices, others simply staring at Harold's house, as if expecting it to confess its own secrets. Julia wrapped her arms around herself, her face pale. "This is insane," she whispered. "A body? Here? Under his house?" I exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over my jaw. I knew something was off about him. But this, I trailed off, my eyes still locked on the porch across the street. We all had questions, so many questions. Who had discovered the body? How long had Harold been hiding it? And worst of all, had he done this before? The police weren't offering much information yet. All we knew was that the body was Harold's ex-wife, Claire Novak, a woman who had seemingly vanished 2 years ago, right after their divorce was finalized. Harold had told everyone that she wanted a fresh start, that she had packed up and left for good. Except she never left. I couldn't shake the image of him standing in his doorway earlier that morning, shifting nervously, brushing off my questions like I was just being paranoid. He had been paranoid, though, just not about what I thought. The camera, the way he avoided looking me in the eye. He hadn't been trying to spy on me. He had been watching the ground beneath his own feet. That night, I couldn't sleep. Neither could Julia. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Harold's face, that flicker of fear when he realized I was onto him. Julia turned toward me in bed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think he did it on purpose?" I stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of that question pressed down on me. I don't know. I wanted to believe that it had been a crime of passion, some terrible moment of rage that he instantly regretted. But the more I thought about it, the less sense that made. People don't just bury their mistakes under their own house unless they plan to keep them hidden forever. By morning, the neighborhood felt different. The crime scene tape was still up. The police hadn't left. Officers stood outside the house, talking in low voices, while forensics teams continued to go in and out, carrying bags of evidence. I wasn't the only one watching. A group of neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk, whispering amongst themselves. When I stepped outside, they turned to me, as if I had answers. Mrs. Patterson, wrapped tightly in her wool coat, clutched her coffee cup like it was the only thing keeping her together. "Did you hear what they found?" I frowned. "Besides the body?" She swallowed, looking around before lowering her voice. "They found more." My stomach dropped. "More?" She nodded, eyes darting toward Harold's house. "The officers were in there all night. I saw them taking boxes out. I don't know what they found, but," she hesitated. "It wasn't just Claire." I felt a slow, cold dread creep up my spine. "What the HLL does that mean?" I asked. She shook her head, her lips pressing together. "I don't know, but whatever it is, it's bad." The rumors spread like wildfire. People started digging up old memories, remembering things Harold had said and done over the years. The odd hours he kept. The way he never let anyone inside his house. The fact that he had never really seemed upset when Claire left. And then, there was something else. Something I hadn't thought about in years. A girl had gone missing in our neighborhood, years ago, long before I moved in. Her name was Emily Carter. She was 19 at the time, a college student home for the summer. One night, she went out for a jog and never came back. The case had gone cold. But now, people were asking the same terrifying question. Had Harold done something to her, too? I couldn't stay away. That afternoon, when most of the neighbors had drifted back inside, I walked up to Harold's house. The crime scene tapes stretched across the front door, but the police were still coming and going. One of the officers, Detective Connolly, I'd overheard his name earlier, noticed me standing there. "Something you need?" he asked, giving me a measured look. I hesitated. I live across the street. I saw Harold installing that camera yesterday morning. That's what made me suspicious." Connolly nodded, folding his arms. "Yeah, we heard." He studied me for a second. "What exactly made you go over there?" I sighed. Honestly, it was weird. He never talked to anyone. But suddenly, he's setting up a camera pointing right at my house. Didn't sit right with me. Connolly exhaled through his nose, glancing back at the house. "You ever been inside?" I frowned. "No, never." "Figures," he muttered. I glanced at the evidence bags they were carrying out. Some looked like paperwork. Others. I swallowed. "Is it true that you found more than just Claire?" His eyes flicked to mine, unreadable. "I can't discuss an active investigation." Which meant yes. Something else was in that house. Something worse. Julia was waiting for me when I got home. She had that look on her face, the one that said she already knew what I was about to tell her. They found more, didn't they? She whispered. I rubbed a hand down my face. Yeah. She exhaled shakily, hugging herself. I knew it. I just knew it. That man was always off. I thought back to every little interaction I had ever had with Harold. Every strange look. Every awkward silence. Every time he had disappeared inside that house, locking the door behind him. And now, I was wondering something I never thought I'd have to ask. How many bodies were buried in this neighborhood? And how many more secrets were waiting to be unearthed? I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever the police found inside Harold's house was worse than anyone was saying. The way Detective Connolly had looked at me, the tightness in his jaw, the way he hesitated before brushing me off, told me that this wasn't just about Claire Novak anymore. Something else was in that house. And for the first time since this whole thing started, I found myself genuinely afraid. That night, Julia and I sat at the kitchen table, our dinner untouched. The news was on in the background, but neither of us were really listening. It was all over the local stations now. Reporters stood in front of Harold's house, bundled in thick coats, their breath fogging up as they spoke into their microphones. Shocking developments in the quiet Buffalo neighborhood of Elmwood Village, where authorities have discovered human remains beneath a local man's porch. Harold Kessler, a longtime resident, has been taken into custody. Police have yet to confirm whether additional evidence has been found inside the home, but sources suggest the investigation is still ongoing. Julia turned to me, her hands gripping her mug of tea. They're hiding something, she muttered. I nodded, still staring at the screen. Yeah, they are. She swallowed hard, then pushed her plate away. I can't eat. Not after this. I reached across the table and took her hand. It was cold. Me neither. For a long time, we just sat there, the low hum of the news filling the silence between us. Then Julia spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. What if they find more bodies? I didn't answer, because I was thinking the exact same thing. By the next morning, things had escalated. The police were still there. The forensics team was still pulling things out of Harold's house. Boxes, bags, things that looked like old furniture. And then, something new. A van arrived. Not just any van. A cadaver dog unit. I stood on my porch, coffee in hand, as I watched officers lead 2 German shepherds toward Harold's backyard. Julia was next to me, wrapped in her robe, gripping her mug so tightly I thought it might shatter. Oh my God, she whispered. They think there's more. My stomach turned to lead. The dogs sniffed around the porch, then moved toward the garden, their handlers following closely behind. For a few minutes, nothing happened. And then, one of the dogs froze. Its body stiffened, ears perked, nose hovering just above the snow-covered ground. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stood there, locked in place. The handler tugged gently on its leash, and the dog let out a low, rumbling growl. A few seconds later, the second dog did the exact same thing. My throat went dry. Julia clutched my arm. Oh my God. The handler raised his hand, signaling the officers. More people rushed over. One of them grabbed a shovel. They started digging. And then, a shout. Got something. More digging. More people gathering. And then, silence. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring. The kind of silence that only happens when something truly awful has just been found. One of the officers turned away, his face pale. He muttered something to another cop, then walked toward Detective Connolly. The detective nodded, his face unreadable, and pulled out his phone. Julia was gripping my arm so tightly now that her nails were digging into my skin. But I barely felt it. Because I knew. I just knew. There was more than one body buried in Harold's backyard. And suddenly, I realized something. That camera he had set up, the one I had confronted him about. Had it been about Claire? Or had he been afraid that someone would find the others? The moment they pulled the first bag from the ground, I knew this wasn't just about Harold's ex-wife anymore. The air outside was deathly still, despite the murmur of voices from the gathered crowd. More police officers had arrived, some directing onlookers away, others working under the tent they had quickly set up over the dig site. Julia's grip on my arm was vice-like. That's another body, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. I swallowed hard. Yeah, it is. Neither of us could look away as the forensic team carefully placed the remains onto a gurney and loaded it into a waiting van. The murmurs among the neighbors grew louder, whispers of fear and morbid curiosity spreading like wildfire. How many? Someone muttered. Who else could it be? Mrs. Patterson, who had lived in the neighborhood the longest, had a grim look on her face. Years ago, she said in a hushed voice, there was that missing girl. Emily Carter. Remember? I felt my stomach drop. I was just thinking that, I admitted. Another neighbor, Mr. LeClaire, chimed in. Emily disappeared back in what? 2008? I remember because my daughter went to school with her. He shook his head. You think? No one finished the thought. No one had to. We all knew what we were thinking. By the afternoon, the street was crawling with reporters. They lined the sidewalks with their cameras and microphones, desperate to get a statement from anyone who would talk. I did my best to ignore them, but one managed to slip through the crowd and catch me before I could retreat inside. "Sir," she called, shuffling toward me with a microphone in hand. "You're one of the neighbors, correct? Do you know Harold Kessler?" I sighed, rubbing a hand over my face. I mean, I wouldn't say I knew him. He wasn't exactly the friendly type. She nodded eagerly. "But you interacted with him?" I hesitated. "Yeah, yesterday morning, actually." Her eyes widened. "Yesterday morning? Before his arrest?" I glanced at the cameras, suddenly regretting opening my mouth. Yeah," I admitted. "I saw him putting up a security camera outside his house. It was weird, so I went over to ask him about it." The reporter's grip on her microphone tightened. "And what did he say?" I exhaled sharply. "Said it was for safety." She blinked. "Safety?" I nodded. "Yeah, but I think we both know now that wasn't the real reason." She glanced toward Harold's house, where the police were still working, before looking back at me. "What do you think the real reason was?" I stared at her for a moment. Then I glanced at the backyard, the spot where the cadaver dogs had stopped. "I think he knew this day was coming," I said. "And he was scared." That night, Julia and I sat in bed, both of us wide awake despite how exhausted we felt. The street outside was still buzzing with activity. Police cars, news vans, distant voices carrying through the cold night air. It didn't feel like our quiet neighborhood anymore. It felt like something out of a horror movie. Julia turned onto her side, facing me. "You don't think he ate dinner and watched TV and just lived in that house, knowing she was under there the whole time, do you?" The thought made my stomach turn. "I don't know," I admitted. "But if I had to guess, yeah, he did." She shuddered, pulling the blanket up to her chin. "God, how does someone do that? How do you just live your life like nothing happened?" I didn't have an answer for that, because deep down, I was wondering the same thing. The next morning, things somehow got worse. It started with another body, then another. By noon, the police had found 3 additional sets of remains. The entire neighborhood was in shock. What had started as a single murder investigation had now turned into something far more terrifying. A serial killer had been living across the street, and no one had noticed. "For bodies," Julia whispered, gripping my arm. "For Jack." I nodded numbly, watching from our front window as the police continued their work. It wasn't just our street anymore. The news was everywhere. National headlines, social media, and then, just when I thought things couldn't get any more disturbing, the FBI arrived. I watched as 2 black SUVs pulled up in front of Harold's house. Agents in dark suits stepped out, speaking briefly with Detective Connolly before heading inside. The moment I saw them, I realized this was bigger than we thought. Much bigger. I stood by the window, watching as the FBI agents disappeared into Harold's house, their faces unreadable. The weight of the situation settled in my chest. This wasn't just about our quiet neighborhood anymore. This was national news. Julia paced behind me, arms wrapped tightly around herself. "What do they even do now?" "He's already arrested." I exhaled. "I don't know. But if the FBI is here, it means there's more to this than we realize." She stopped pacing and looked at me. "What if there are more people out there?" I turned away from the window, my stomach twisting. "We never really knew him," I admitted. "And now, I wonder if anyone did." Over the next few days, the neighborhood felt like it had been turned inside out. More news vans arrived, cameras rolling at all hours. The police presence only grew stronger. Every morning, I'd wake up to the sight of law enforcement combing through Harold's house, his backyard, even the woods behind our street. And then, the beam shell dropped. It turned out Harold wasn't just some reclusive, unfriendly neighbor. He was a suspect in multiple disappearances across state lines. The FBI had linked him to missing persons cases in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and even as far as Indiana. The remains they found in his backyard were just the beginning. It was a horrifying realization. The man who had lived across the street from me, the guy I had casually nodded to while getting my mail, had been living a double life. And yet, even with everything they were uncovering, something still nagged at me. The camera. Why had Harold suddenly panicked and put it up? What had changed? And then, it clicked. He wasn't afraid of being caught by random chance. He was afraid of someone specific finding out. Someone who already knew something. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was one last piece of the puzzle missing. So, I did something reckless. I went to the jail. I wasn't even sure if they'd let me see Harold, but to my surprise, after some convincing, they allowed a supervised visit. When I walked into the cold, sterile room, Harold was already sitting at the table, wearing an orange jumpsuit. His wrists were cuffed, his eyes hollow. He looked up when I sat down, blinking like he was seeing me for the first time. "Jack," he muttered. I leaned forward, keeping my voice steady. "Harold, why the camera?" His jaw tightened. "I already told you." I shook my head. "No, you lied. You weren't afraid of random criminals. You weren't scared of some stranger. You were scared of someone finding something. And I think I know who." Harold didn't say anything, but his hands twitched. I took that as confirmation. "Someone in the neighborhood figured you out, didn't they?" I pressed. "Someone was getting too close. And that's why you put up the camera, to watch them." A muscle in his jaw twitched. I kept going. You knew your time was running out. And the only reason we're even sitting here right now is because that person forced your hand. Harold let out a slow, shaky breath. He wasn't going to admit anything outright, but he didn't have to. I already knew. I left the jail with more questions than answers. But when I got home, something clicked. Mrs. Patterson. She had lived here the longest. She had whispered to me about Harold digging in his backyard. She had seemed too prepared for all of this, like she had been waiting for it to happen. So, I decided to pay her a visit. She answered the door almost immediately, her eyes sharp, like she had been expecting me. I was right, wasn't I? She said simply. I studied her for a moment before nodding. You knew? She exhaled, then stepped aside, motioning for me to come in. I hesitated, then followed her into the cozy warmth of her living room. Mrs. Patterson sat down, folding her hands in her lap. I didn't have proof. Not real proof. But I knew something was wrong with that man. I stayed silent, waiting for her to continue. I started keeping track of things, she admitted. Who came to his house? Who didn't leave? Late night noises. Strange smells. Her eyes darkened. And then, 2 weeks ago, I saw him in the backyard. Digging. That's when I knew. I felt a chill run down my spine. So what did you do? A small, knowing smile crossed her face. I sent an anonymous tip to the police. My eyebrows shot up. She leaned back, a satisfied glint in her eyes. I knew they wouldn't take me seriously without more. So, I kept an eye on him. And then, you confronted him about the camera. She tilted her head. That's when I realized he was panicking. That's when I knew it was only a matter of time. I let out a low whistle. So, you set him up. She shrugged. I sped up the inevitable. I sat back, a slow grin spreading across my face. Damn, Mrs. Patterson, the sweet, elderly woman who made cookies for the neighborhood kids, had outplayed a serial killer. Harold had been so paranoid about getting caught that he exposed himself. And Mrs. Patterson had been the one pulling the strings the whole time. Harold was never getting out of prison. That much was clear. Between the bodies they had already found and the ones they were still uncovering, the charges against him were ironclad. The FBI linked him to at least 7 disappearances, some as far back as 15 years ago. And Mrs. Patterson? She never took credit publicly. She just went on with her life like nothing had happened. But one day, about a month after everything had settled, I found a small envelope in my mailbox. No name, no return address. Inside was a single note, written in neat cursive. Justice isn't about cruelty. It's about making sure the right people never walk free again. Sleep well, Jack. We're safe now. I smiled. For the first time in weeks, I did.
يعني هو يعني احنا كل سنة بيبقى فيه تطور، بس هو الشكل العام انه بيبقى فيه تنظيم كويس في كل سنة، وهو الجديد المرة دي ان الحياة هي اللي بتغطي المهرجان. وتحية لكل العاملين في الحياة مني ومن فرقتي الموسيقية.
وعايزة انوه لحضرتك كمان انه النهارده الحفلة ترند. حفلة حضرتك يمكن كان في ترند الاول الاستاذ علي الحجار وحضرتك النهارده. فيعني اعتقد ان ده نجاح كبير جدا كمان المشاهدين اللي بيشوفونا على التلفزيون.
ما كانش ليا حظ ان انا احضر حفلة الاستاذ علي.
أيوة
لكن هتابع بقى بعد كده كل الحاجات.
تابع وتشوف بقى الترند بقى والحاجات. إن شاء الله. سريعا كده اي جديد عند حضرتك بتقدمه الفترة اللي جاية؟
يعني انا